Welcome to Lifespan, the weekly podcast where we dig into history's unhinged side. Forget the dry stuff from school. We're about the outrageous, the chaotic, the
Yeah.
lives that make you go, wait, what?
And today we are definitely diving into one of those lives.
Absolutely. We're starting a truly bizarre journey today based on a fascinating stack of testimonies you listeners sent over. We're talking about Vlad the Third Dracula.
Better known, of course, as Vlad the Impaler.
Exactly. And our mission really is to cut through all that, the vampire myth and try to understand the actual man, the historical figure behind the fangs.
That's the goal. These testimonies, they offer an amazing, sometimes unsettling look into his world, his life, and how this whole legend got started, separating fact from fiction.
Okay, so let's set the scene. We need to go back, way back to the 15th century, Wallachia. These testimonies painted as, well, a pretty rough neighborhood.
Oh, absolutely. You've got Wallachia squeezed right between the Ottoman Empire and the Kingdom of Hungary. It's like being stuck between a rock and a hard place constantly.
So constant pressure, constant conflict.
Pretty much. It
Yeah.
was a buffer zone, a battleground for these bigger powers. So that means nonstop warfare, political chaos, just this pervasive sense of danger. Survival was, the main game.
And it wasn't just threats from outside, was it? I was reading in these accounts about the local nobles, the boyars. Sounds like they were not exactly reliable.
Reliable, not the word I'd use. Treacherous is more like it. The boyars were incredibly volatile. Their loyalties, always shifting, mostly based on who offered them the most power or wealth.
And that had real consequences, right?
Yeah.
For Vlad's own family.
Huge consequences. As some of these records show, Vlad's own father and his older brother were actually betrayed and murdered, likely thanks to these internal boyar power plays.
Wow. Okay. And Vlad himself, didn't he spend time, like, as a kid, as a hostage with the Ottomans?
He did, yes. Alongside his younger brother, Radu, they were political hostages.
That's got to mess with your head, right?
Yeah,
Spending your formative years with the enemy, essentially.
profoundly. You can't really overstate how much that likely shaped him. He saw Ottoman power up close, their military tactics. It definitely fueled his later resistance.
But his brother Radu had a different experience.
Yeah, that's a really key point from some of these testimonies. Radu seemed to adapt much better to Ottoman life. He even became quite close with the future Sultan, Mehmed II.
Huh. Two brothers, same situation, totally different outcomes.
Exactly. And that difference, that divergence, would become incredibly important and tragic later on.
Okay, so let's recap the situation. You've got constant war, internal backstabbing from the nobles, formative years as a hostage. It sounds like ruling Wallachia was, well, borderline impossible.
A seriously uphill battle, yes.
And then throw in the religious tensions, Christianity versus the expanding Islamic Ottoman Empire. Just another layer of conflict.
Absolutely. Religion was a huge factor. It framed the conflict, gave both sides a rallying cry. Defending Christendom was a big deal.
Right. So somehow, against all these odds, Vlad actually becomes Prince of Wallachia. The testimonies say 3 times, actually.
Yes, 3 separate reigns, though none of them were particularly long. The political situation was just too unstable.
So what was his ruling style like? When he takes power, say, in 1456, what happens?
Well, looking at these accounts, especially from that first proper reign, it seems he adopted a policy of, let's call it zero tolerance, extreme measures.
How extreme.
He wanted to crush any potential opposition immediately and brutally. No half measures. Consolidate power fast.
And that brings us to the infamous story of the Boyar Feast, doesn't it? One of the chronicles you sent paints a really grim picture.
Ah, yes. The legend goes, and it pops up in several sources you shared, that he invited hundreds of boyars to this big Easter feast. Many of them were people he suspected or knew were involved in his father's and brother's deaths.
Okay, sounds like a setup.
Very likely. After the meal, he supposedly questioned them, asked how many princes they'd served. The older ones, who admitted to serving many, basically showing their shifting loyalties, impaled on the spot.
Impaled, just like that. And the younger ones.
They were spared immediate death but forced into hard labor. They had to march off and build his fortress, Ponari Citadel, high up in the mountains.
So, right off the bat, a brutal message.
Hmm.
Loyalty or death, essentially.
It was a stark message, yeah. Dismantling that old, disloyal power structure. And Ponari Citadel itself, just the location building, that was punishment.
And his defiance wasn't just aimed internally, right? What about the Ottomans? The turban incident comes up a lot.
Right, the turbans. That was pure defiance against the Sultan. Ottoman envoys came, refused to take off their turbans in his presence, citing religious custom,
And Vlad's response was,
to have their turbans nailed to their heads.
nailed. Wow, okay.
Yeah.
That's sending a message. A very painful message.
Extremely painful and extremely clear. Wallachia wasn't going to just bow down. It was audacious, provocative, but very Vlad.
So it's interesting, reading through these different testimonies, you get such different Vlads. Like, some accounts paint him as this total monster, others almost a hero.
That's the core paradox, isn't it? For the average Wallachian peasant, maybe someone suffering under corrupt boyars or bandits, Vlad's harsh justice might have actually felt like order. Scary order, but order nonetheless.
So bring stability through fear.
Possibly. And later Romanian folklore, some of which you shared, definitely leans into that strong leader, national defender image. He protected us.
But then you get the Western European accounts, especially the German ones. They had a very different take.
Oh, drastically different. The German Saxon merchants in neighboring Transylvania had major trade disputes with Vlad. They saw him as disrupting their business as a tyrant.
And they had access to the printing press, right?
Exactly. The printing press was relatively new, and they used it effectively. Those German pamphlets, filled with lurid tales of his cruelty, spread like wildfire across Europe.
So they basically created the Western image of Vlad, the bloodthirsty monster.
They were hugely influential in cementing that image, yes. It became the dominant narrative in the West for centuries, a very effective, very early propaganda campaign.
Okay, so we have this fearsome reputation. Let's dig into the why. What do these testimonies suggest were the reasons behind this extreme brutality? Let's start with the brutal pragmatist idea.
Right. This theory, which comes up in several historical analyses you sent, argues that Vlad's methods, especially impalement, weren't just random cruelty. They served a purpose.
Psychological warfare.
Precisely. Impalement was slow, agonizing, incredibly public. It was designed to terrify enemies, collaborators, potential rebels. Maximum deterrent effect.
And the forest of the impaled. That sounds like the peak of this strategy.
It really does. Outside his capital, Targoviite. Thousands upon thousands of impaled bodies. Estimates vary wildly. Maybe 20,000, maybe more. Just rows of them. Imagine encountering that.
I can't. It's horrific.
It was meant to be. It wasn't just about killing people. It was a spectacle. A horrifying display of absolute power designed to break the will of his enemies. Like state-sponsored terror theater.
Okay, so pragmatism, however grim. What about the vengeful son angle, his father, his brother? That's got to be a powerful motivator.
Definitely. This theory, strongly supported by some of the chronicles, focuses on revenge. The boyars betrayed his family. So, the Easter Feast massacre we talked about, that fits perfectly. Payback.
You can see how that personal trauma, that betrayal, could fuel incredible ruthlessness.
Absolutely. Losing family like that, especially in that treacherous environment, it would leave deep scars. And again, contrast that with Radu, his brother, who sided with the Ottomans eventually. Family loyalties were completely fractured.
Then there's the sadistic monster theory, mostly from those German pamphlets. How much stock should we put in that? Allowing for propaganda, could there still be, a core of just enjoyment of cruelty?
It's tricky. You have to take the German accounts with a huge grain of salt. They had an agenda. They wanted to demonize him. They absolutely exaggerated.
But
the sheer volume of gruesome detail is hard to ignore completely, even if embellished. Could there have been a streak of genuine sadism there, beyond just pragmatism or revenge? It's plausible. We can't know for sure, but dismissing all of it might be too easy.
Okay. And what about the righteous crusader view? Some of the later Romanian stuff seems to frame it that way, right? Defending Christianity.
Yes, particularly in later nationalist narratives. Vlad standing firm against the Ottoman tide, defending Christian Europe. His harshness was directed at enemies of the faith, enemies of Wallachia.
So a religious justification, possibly mixed with political necessity.
It's likely a mix. Defending the realm and defending the faith were often intertwined in that era, but how much was genuine piety versus political expediency? Hard to say.
And finally, the big one, the proto-vampire theory. Where does that even come from historically?
Almost entirely from fiction. specifically Bram Stoker's novel, Dracula.
So no historical basis in these testimonies for blood drinking or anything supernatural?
None whatsoever. Zero credible evidence. Stoker borrowed the name Dracula, which itself is interesting.
Right, tell me about the name. It wasn't originally sinister.
No. Vlad's father was inducted into the Order of the Dragon, Dracul in Romanian, a chivalric order fighting for Christianity. So Vlad, his son, was Dracula, son of the dragon.
Son of the Dragon.
Okay. But later, Drac also took on the meaning of devil in Romanian. So you get this cool dark ambiguity. Son of the dragon or son of the devil.
Ah, you can see why Stoker liked that.
Exactly. That duality was perfect for his fictional creation. But any fringe theories about, say, medical conditions like porphyria causing his behavior, pure speculation, no historical backing at all.
Okay, so let's strip away the vampire stuff. The real Vlad still made a massive impact, didn't he? That Forest of the Impaled. What did the Sultan himself, Mehmed II, make of that?
It apparently stopped him dead in his tracks. Mehmed the Conqueror, the guy who took Constantinople. He saw the Forest of the Impaled and, according to some accounts, was so horrified, so demoralized, he turned his army around and retreated.
Wow, so the psychological warfare actually worked, even on a powerful Sultan.
It seems so. A chilling testament to how effective those brutal tactics could be.
And meanwhile, back in the West, those German pamphlets just kept circulating, right? Keeping that bloodthirsty tyrant image alive for ages.
For centuries, yes. They really defined his image in Western Europe long before anyone thought of vampires. It's amazing how long-lasting that kind of propaganda can be.
But then, history's funny. Fast forward a few hundred years to the 19th century. Suddenly, in Romania, Vlad gets rehabilitated. He goes from monster to hero.
Yeah, it's a fascinating shift. With the rise of Romanian nationalism, people started looking back for symbols of independence, of resistance against foreign powers, especially the Ottomans.
And Vlad fit the bill.
Perfectly. The guy who defied the Sultan, who imposed order, who fought for Wallachia, he became a national hero, a symbol of Romanian strength and sovereignty. That image was even promoted later, during the communist era.
And then Bram Stoker writes his novel.
And suddenly, Vlad's global image takes this completely different, bizarre turn. Dracula, the book, just overshadows everything else. The historical figure gets buried under the fictional vampire.
Which leads to, well, everything we see today. Movies, books, TV shows.
Well, vampire craze, yeah. And Dracula tourism in Romania.
Right, people visiting castles. Though looking at these testimonies, the main castle everyone associates with Dracula, Bran Castle, it didn't really have much to do with the real Vlad.
Very little connection, historically speaking. He might have stayed there briefly, maybe was imprisoned nearby, but it wasn't his castle. His main fortress was Ponari, now mostly ruins. People also visit Sighisoara, his supposed birthplace, and Snagov Monastery, where he might be buried. But yeah, Bran Castle is more about the myth than the man.
Let's circle back to some of those intriguing details from the testimonies. We talked about the name Dracula, son of the dragon devil. What about the Golden Cup?
Ah, the legend of the Golden Cup in Targoviet. The story goes he placed this expensive golden cup by a public fountain, and nobody dared steal it throughout his entire reign.
Because they were too terrified.
Exactly. Whether it literally happened or it's just a symbolic folktale, it speaks volumes about the level of fear and maybe order he imposed. Honesty through terror.
And the stories of him dining among the impaled. How much of that is real versus, those German pamphlets again?
That image is potent, isn't it? Feasting while surrounded by dying victims. The really lurid parts, like dipping bread in their blood, almost certainly exaggeration from the propaganda.
But the act itself, eating dinner with that as your backdrop.
That feels disturbingly plausible as a power move.
Yeah.
A calculated display of utter dominance and fearlessness. Look at me, I feast while you suffer. This is my power.
Chilling. What about the story of him burning the poor and sick? That sounds like peak propaganda.
Yeah, the consensus among historians, based on the lack of corroborating evidence outside the most hostile sources, is that this story is almost certainly a fabrication, gathering all the beggars and sick people into a hall and burning it down. It sounds designed purely to make him seem monstrously evil, beyond even his documented cruelty.
Okay. And his brother, Radu the Handsome. Their relationship seems so central and so tragic.
It really is. Radu grew up with Vlad at the Ottoman court, but embraced it, became a favorite of the Sultan. Vlad resisted. This fundamental difference, this split loyalty.
It led to conflict.
Absolutely. Radu, backed by Ottoman forces, actually led the campaign that drove Vlad from the throne in 1462. Brother against brother, fueled by these huge geopolitical forces.
So Vlad gets overthrown, partly by his own brother. what happens then? I read he was imprisoned in Hungary for a long time.
Yes, for about 12 years under Matthias Corvinus, the king of Hungary. The politics are complex, involving shifting alliances with the Ottomans again.
But he gets out eventually, and even rules again.
He does. Very briefly, in 1476, he manages to reclaim the Wallachian throne for a third time, but it doesn't last long.
And his death. Is it as dramatic as his life?
It's shrouded in mystery, actually. The general consensus from the accounts is that he died in battle shortly after regaining power, fighting the Ottomans again. But the exact circumstances where he fell, even where he's buried, it's all debated.
Snagov Monastery is the main theory for his burial place, right?
Yep.
Based on some of the later evidence you sent.
It's the leading candidate, yes. There was an unmarked tomb discovered there, and local tradition strongly associates it with Vlad, but it's not definitively proven. Adds to the enigma, doesn't it?
It really does. And it feels important to stress, as we wrap up, how biased almost all our information is. As these analyses point out, we're mostly hearing from his enemies.
That's crucial. The German pamphlets, the Ottoman chronicles, these are hostile accounts. They wanted him to look bad. Later, Romanian folklore often swings the other way, making him into a flawless hero.
Are there any less biased sources?
The Russian chronicles offer a slightly different perspective. They still portray him as cruel, very cruel, but also as a strong and effective ruler who fought against enemies. Less hysteria than the German accounts, maybe a bit more balanced, but still viewing him from afar. It just highlights how hard it is to get a truly objective picture.
So piecing it all together from these varied, often conflicting testimonies, Vlad the Impaler emerges as this incredibly complex figure. Terrifying ruler, yes, but also a national hero to some, and then, totally unintentionally, the inspiration for this massive global myth.
Exactly. He's a stark reminder that history isn't simple, it isn't black and white. He was absolutely a product of incredibly brutal times. You had to be ruthless to survive, let alone rule, in 15th century Wallachia. But did his actions go beyond what was necessary? Probably.
He really resists easy labels, doesn't he?
Completely. He embodies the darkness of that era, but maybe also its resilience in a strange way.
So, thinking about this bizarre journey we've taken through Vlad's life using these fascinating testimonies, it leaves me with a big question, really. Was he just this uniquely monstrous individual, someone whose own sadism drove him to leave this bloody mark on history and our imagination? Or was he more a product of his time? A man shaped, maybe twisted, by the sheer brutality of the world he lived in, forced into horrific acts just to survive and hold on to power?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the answer is probably somewhere in between, both.
Yeah, likely a messy combination of the man and the moment.
His context absolutely mattered. The violence, the treachery, the constant threat, it explains a lot. But the scale and the nature of his cruelty, the sheer theatricality of it sometimes, that suggests something more personal, perhaps. A personality capable of, and maybe even drawn to, extreme ruthlessness.
It really makes you think about how we interpret history, how legends form, and how context shapes everything.
Definitely. His story is a powerful lesson in looking beyond the myths, examining the sources critically, and embracing the messy, often uncomfortable complexities of the past.
Well, this has been quite the journey into the unhinged side of history. Thanks for walking me through these testimonies and helping untangle the man from the myth.
My pleasure. It's a story that just keeps drawing you in, doesn't it? Disturbing, but undeniably fascinating. And the testimonies you gathered really provided a rich tapestry to explore.